3 seconds. That's how long it took for James Whittaker to destroy his entire future. 1 second to recognize the woman in the crimson gown, 1 second to grab her wrist hard enough to bruise, 1 second for the champagne glass to hit the floor. He should have used that time to run. The champagne glass exploded against marble the instant James's fingers locked around Maya's wrist. The sound echoed through the Manhattan Grand Ballroom like a gunshot, cutting through 100 conversations, silencing a string quartet mid-note, freezing 300 guests mid-sip. Maya stumbled back against the auction table, her crimson gown catching on the corner, tearing at the hem as she steadied herself. For 3 heartbeats, the ballroom existed in a vacuum of shock. Maya looked up at the man towering over her, his face twisted with the same contempt she remembered from 3 years ago. James Whittaker, her ex, the man who'd publicly discarded her when she stopped being useful to his image, who'd humiliated her in front of his colleagues, who'd left her sobbing in an empty apartment with nothing but shame and a broken spirit. "Still clinging to places you don't belong, I see," James sneered, loud enough for the nearest tables to hear. "Some people never learn their place." He had no idea who she'd become, no idea that the nobody he remembered, the woman who'd begged for an explanation, who'd believed his promises, who'd cried herself to sleep for months, had been buried and reborn. No idea about the platinum wedding band hidden beneath her evening glove, warm against her finger. No idea about the penthouse overlooking Central Park she'd woken up in that morning, or the life she'd quietly built in his absence. And James definitely had no idea about the man whose last name she now carried, the man whose security detail had been tracking her location all evening, the man whose presence could empty a room or fill a morgue, depending on his mood. Marco De Luca, her husband, the Italian-American king who ruled the East Coast from boardrooms to back alleys. As James tightened his grip, Maya's free hand moved to the diamond-encrusted clutch at her side. Inside, her phone vibrated once. The screen read simply, "Marco, video call." She answered, and Marco's voice, deadly calm, laced with something cold and ancient, filled the space between them. "Amore mio, are you all right?"
If this story pulled you in, if you felt the tension, the hurt, the power beneath the silence, then you're exactly where you're meant to be. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapter, because the stories we tell here aren't just entertainment, they're confessions, consequences, and the moments that change everything. The ballroom had gone completely still. Every eye was on them now, on James's hand wrapped around Maya's wrist, on her torn dress and startled expression, on the phone pressed to her ear with a man's voice coming through clear enough for nearby guests to hear. But Maya wasn't looking at James anymore. She was looking past him, at the figure moving through the crowd with a kind of quiet authority that parts seas of people without a word being spoken. Marco, in a tailored black suit that probably cost more than James's car, his expression unreadable, but his eyes locked on his wife with an intensity that made several guests step back instinctively. James hadn't seen him yet. He was still talking, still sneering, still living in a version of reality that was about to crumble around him. Because he didn't know what Maya knew. He didn't know the story of how she'd gotten here, how she'd clawed her way back from nothing, how she'd rebuilt herself piece by piece, or how she'd met the one man in the world who saw her not as something to fix or save, but as someone worth protecting. 3 years earlier, Maya Carter had been a different woman. But that story would have to wait, because Marco De Luca had just reached them. He moved through the crowd like water finding its level, inevitable, unhurried, absolute. The sea of designer gowns and $1,000 tuxedos parted without him saying a word, without him even gesturing. People simply moved. Some glanced up and stepped aside immediately. Others felt the shift in air pressure and turned, their champagne flutes pausing halfway to their lips as they registered who was approaching. Maya watched recognition ripple through the ballroom in real time. A board member's face went carefully blank. A city councilman suddenly found his phone fascinating. A hedge fund manager whispered urgently to his wife, and they both took 3 steps backward. Marco stopped 2 feet behind James, close enough to be present, far enough to be patient. He was exactly as he'd been that morning when he'd kissed her goodbye, 6'2" of controlled power wrapped in a black suit tailored so precisely it might have been painted on. Italian wool, probably brioning, definitely custom. His dark hair was swept back, showing the sharp angles of a face that gave away nothing. Not anger, not concern, nothing but an unreadable calm that somehow felt more dangerous than any expression could be. His eyes, though, his eyes were locked on Maya with an intensity that made her chest tighten, not with fear, but with the recognition of being seen, being protected, being claimed. James was still talking, still gripping her wrist, still completely oblivious to the fact that the room's entire power structure had just shifted 3 feet to his left. I'm pathetic, honestly. Did you crash this event, Maya? Or are you serving drinks tonight? I know you've had some difficulties since we... Excuse me? Marco's voice cut through James's monologue like a blade through silk. Deep, accented, Italian vowels softening the edges of English consonants. Polite in the way an apex predator might be polite before striking. James turned, irritation flashing across his face. I'm in the middle of... He stopped. Whatever he saw in Marco's face made the rest of his sentence die in his throat. You're going to release her wrist, Marco said quietly. Not a request, a statement of fact about something that was already happening in every timeline except this one. James's eyes narrowed. He glanced at Marco's suit, his stance, the way he carried himself, and came to exactly the wrong conclusion. His grip on Maya tightened instead, his corporate arrogance overriding whatever primitive survival instinct had briefly flickered to life. Listen, buddy, I don't know if you're security or somebody's bodyguard, but this is a private conversation between me and... her husband. 2 words. The temperature in the ballroom dropped 10 degrees. Marco reached past James, slowly, deliberately, giving him every chance to make the smart choice, and gently wrapped his hand around Maya's free wrist. Not grabbing, not pulling, just there, steady, warm, safe. You're safe now, amore, he said to Maya, his voice softening in a way that made it clear these were the only gentle words James would hear tonight. Maya's fingers released the clutch she'd been holding. Marco guided her hand up to his chest, then turned his attention back to James with the same expression a man might give an insect he was deciding whether to crush or flick away. That's when James noticed them, the men in dark suits positioned at every exit, the venue manager standing frozen near the stage, phone pressed to his ear, face pale, the photographer who'd been taking candid shots suddenly very interested in the floor, the security guard by the main entrance speaking urgently to his radio while staring directly at their table. The whispers started, like wind through grass. That's Marco DeLuca. East Coast, they say. He... My God, Whitaker just grabbed his... Someone should tell him. Too late now. James's face went from red to white in the span of 3 heartbeats. Wait, you're... No, that's not... He looked at Maya, then at Marco, then at Maya again, his confident sneer crumbling into something between disbelief and dawning horror. You can't be married to him. You are nothing. This is some kind of... Careful. 1 word from Marco, spoken so quietly that only the 3 of them and the nearest table heard it, but it landed like a hammer on glass. James's hand finally released Maya's wrist. Marco didn't move forward, didn't touch James, didn't need to. He simply existed in the space, his presence rewriting every assumption James had made about this encounter, about Maya, about the evening, about his future. You have 5 seconds, Marco said conversationally, to apologize to my wife. The ballroom held its breath. James opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No apology came. Marco's expression didn't change, but something shifted. Something in his posture, in the way he angled his head, in the subtle signal he gave to someone across the room. The security by the exits moved inward, and James Whittaker finally understood that he wasn't in control. He never had been. The real power had been standing behind him the entire time. 5 seconds became 10, 10 became 15. James stood frozen, his mouth working soundlessly, trapped between the instinct to run and the ego that wouldn't let him believe this was real, that she was real, that any of this could possibly be happening. Maya watched him struggle with it, and for the first time in 3 years, she didn't feel small. 3 years, 2 months, and 17 days ago, she had felt very small indeed. The memory hit her with the clarity of a photograph. James's corner office, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Midtown, her standing by his desk in the blazer she'd bought specifically to look professional enough for his colleagues. His associates were there, 3 men in suits worth more than her monthly rent, watching as James delivered his verdict. "Maya, you're wonderful, really, but I'm at a different place in my life now. I need someone who fits, someone who understands this world." She asked him what he meant, asked if this was about her job, her background, something she could fix. He looked at her with something between pity and contempt. "It's about knowing your place, and this," he gestured around his office, at his life, at the world he'd built, "this isn't it." His associates smirked. One had actually laughed.
James had handed her a check, $5,000, like a severance package for a relationship, and told her to take care of herself. She'd torn it up in the elevator, cried in the parking garage, driven home to the apartment they'd shared, only to find the locks changed and her belongings in boxes by the dumpster. That was the James she remembered, the one who'd controlled their finances for efficiency, who'd critiqued her clothes, her friends, her job, who'd made her feel like she should be grateful he'd chosen her at all. The one who'd promised her the world, then made her feel worthless when she believed him. "Well," Marco's voice brought her back to the present. "I'm waiting." James blinked rapidly, his brain finally catching up to his situation. "This is insane. You can't be married to Marco DeLuca. Maya, come on. What is this? Did you hire an actor? Is this some kind of revenge fantasy?" The laugh that escaped him was high-pitched, desperate. "You expect me to believe that you, of all people, ended up with—" He gestured at Marco, at the security, at the entire scene. "With this?" Maya felt Marco's hand tighten slightly on hers. A question. "Do you want me to handle this, or do you want to?" She squeezed back. "I've got this." "You're right, James," Maya said quietly, her voice steady in a way it never had been when they were together. 3 years ago, you would have been right. I was exactly who you thought I was." She'd been broken, completely shattered. The months after James had been a blur of survival, she'd moved into a studio apartment in Queens with a roommate she found on Craigslist, worked double shifts at a nonprofit that barely covered rent, ate ramen and canned soup because groceries were a luxury she couldn't afford. Some nights, she'd believed everything James had said about her, that she was small, forgettable, lucky to have had him at all. Other nights, she'd been angry enough to scream. Most nights, she'd just been tired. But slowly, painfully, she'd started rebuilding, started therapy with a counselor who worked on a sliding scale, started saying no to people who took more than they gave, started recognizing the patterns, the ways James had isolated her, controlled her, made her doubt her own reality, started remembering who she'd been before him. "I was nobody," Maya continued, her eyes locked on James. "I believed that. You made sure I believed that." Around them, the ballroom had gone silent enough to hear the crystal chandeliers chime in the air conditioning current. Guests had stopped pretending not to listen. Phones were definitely recording now. "But you made a mistake, James. You assumed I'd stay broken." The day she met Marco, she was whole again. Different than before, but whole. It had been a chance encounter, a fundraiser for the nonprofit where she'd worked her way up to program director. Marco had been there representing one of his legitimate business interests, a real estate development fund that donated to community programs. She'd given the presentation about their work with domestic violence survivors, talked about resilience, about rebuilding, about the strength it took to walk away and start over. Afterward, he'd approached her, not with a line or a proposition, but with a question. How long did it take you? She'd known immediately what he meant. To rebuild? 3 years, give or take. Was it worth it? Every single day. He'd smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from him. I'm Marco. Maya. They'd talked for 2 hours about survival and strength, about the masks people wore in public versus who they really were, about building something real from broken pieces. He'd never once made her feel like she should be grateful for his attention, never once made her feel small. 3 months later, he'd proposed on the balcony of his penthouse, the city spreading out below them like a carpet of lights. I'm not an easy man to love. My world is complicated, dangerous. But I will never make you feel less than what you are. And what you are, Maya Carter, is extraordinary. She'd said yes, and she'd meant it. You rebuilt yourself, James said now, his voice dripping with skepticism. Right, and somehow, in the process of working at whatever nonprofit you ended up at, you caught the attention of one of the most dangerous men on the East Coast? That's your story? It's not a story. It's what happened. Your mistake was thinking she needed saving. She didn't. She'd already saved herself. By the time I met her, she was already stronger than most men I know. She'd survived you. That alone proved she could survive anything. James's face cycled through emotions, disbelief, anger, something that might have been jealousy. This is ridiculous. You're actually telling me that you, she pointed to Maya, the woman who cried in my office, who begged me to explain what she'd done wrong, who I had to give money to because she couldn't take care of herself, you're telling me you're married to Marco DeLuca? I'm not telling you. I'm showing you. She raised her left hand, sliding off the evening glove. The wedding ring caught the chandelier light and threw it back like a declaration of war. Platinum band, diamonds that could fund a small country, engraved on the inside with words only she and Marco knew. Rinata dalle cenere, reborn from ashes. James stared at the ring, then at Maya, then at Marco, and finally, he started to believe. His face went gray. No, this can't be. But it is, Marco said, his voice carrying across the ballroom with quiet finality. And now, James Whittaker, we're going to discuss what happens next.
Marco didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The Whittaker-Stevenson merger, he began, his tone conversational, as if discussing the weather. The one that made you partner 3 years ago? Impressive timing, wasn't it? Just weeks after you left Maya. James's eyes flickered. That was legitimate business. I don't know what you think you... $2.3 million in client funds, Marco continued, unperturbed. Redirected through a shell company in the Caymans. Technically legal the way you structured it, but your clients at Stevenson Capital didn't authorize those transfers, did they? The color drained from James's face. Around them, the whispers started like static electricity before a storm. What is he talking about? Whittaker-Stevenson? My firm uses them for... Someone record this. Maya watched as phones came out, slowly at first, then all at once. A dozen screens, then 20, then more, all angled toward the three of them like flowers turning toward the sun, or vultures circling a dying animal. James's hands clenched into fists. You don't know what you're talking about. Those were authorized investment reallocations, fully documented. Documented by Christina Vale, Marco said, your associate, also your mistress for the past 18 months. He paused, letting that sink in. The same Christina Vale is currently cooperating with the SEC in exchange for immunity.
She gave them everything, James. Transaction records, emails, text messages, including the ones where you discussed how to hide the discrepancies. A woman near the front, elegant in her 60s, dripping in pearls, gasped audibly. James Whittaker has been managing our foundation's portfolio for 2 years. Her husband pulled out his phone immediately, fingers flying across the screen. That's slander, James sputtered, but his voice had lost its confidence. His eyes darted around the ballroom, looking for allies, for exits, for anything. You can't just accuse me of... The Harper estate account, Marco continued, as relentless as a tide. Elderly widow transferred her late husband's entire portfolio to your management, $4.7 million. You told her you'd invested conservatively, bonds, blue-chip stocks, safe returns for her retirement. James's jaw tightened. Instead, you put it in high-risk derivatives. When they crashed, you covered the losses with funds from the Chen Family Trust. When that created a shortfall, you used money from the Morrison account. A shell game, James, robbing Peter to pay Paul, except Peter and Paul are retirees who trusted you with their life savings. The whispers had become a roar. My God, the Harper widow, that's Eleanor Harper. She's on the board at Lenox Hill. The Chen family? James manages their... Someone called the SEC. Maya stood perfectly still, Marco's hand warm in hers, and watched it happen. Watched James's world crack like ice under pressure. She felt not joy, exactly, not the savage satisfaction she might have expected, just a strange, quiet steadiness, like watching a storm behind glass, aware of its power, untouched by its destruction. This wasn't revenge. This was simply truth. Truth that had been buried, hidden, papered over with James's charm and his suits and his corner office. Truth that had always been there, waiting. A man in a navy suit pushed through the crowd, older, silver-haired, with the kind of authority that came from old money and older power. Maya recognized him from the event program. Richard Stevenson, James's senior partner. Whittaker, Stevenson said, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. Tell me this isn't true. Tell me Marco DeLuca is lying. James opened his mouth, closed it. Richard, I can explain... Can you? Stevenson's face had gone red. Can you explain why I just received an email from our compliance officer with attached SEC documentation? Can you explain why our firm's name is about to be dragged through every financial publication in the country? Those documents are fabricated. He pointed at Marco, his hand shaking. He's trying to destroy me because of some grudge about her. He gestured wildly at Maya, because I dated her years ago, and there it is, Marco said softly. Even now, you can't help yourself. He took one step forward, just one, but the movement carried such controlled danger that James stumbled backward, bumping into the auction table. You think this is about Maya? About your past relationship? Marco's voice dropped to something cold and ancient, the accent thickening. This has nothing to do with revenge. I didn't fabricate those documents. I didn't steal that money. I didn't betray those clients' trust. Another step. You did that yourself. Years of it. I just decided to stop pretending I didn't know. Around them, the crowd had formed a loose circle, not to see better, but to put distance between themselves and what was happening. Board members and business partners, people who'd smiled at James an hour ago, now stepping back like he carried a contagion. Social death, Maya realized. She was watching social death in real time. A woman in an emerald gown, James's fiancée, Maya recognized from the society pages, appeared at the edge of the crowd, saw what was happening, and turned around immediately. No questions, no defense, just gone. The Sanderson Project, the luxury development in Brooklyn. You told investors it was fully permitted, ready to break ground. You raised $12 million. It is permitted. The permits are conditional. You know that. Your investors don't. And the $12 million, half of it is sitting in your personal account, the account you opened under your mother's maiden name. James's face went from white to gray. How do you... He stopped, seeming to realize that asking how Marco knew was an admission that it was true. Maya watched him fracture, watched the confidence that seemed so unshakable 3 years ago, the certainty that he was untouchable, that his charm and his position made him immune to consequences, crack and splinter and fall away. She'd spent so long thinking he was powerful, that he'd been right to leave her because she wasn't enough for his world. But looking at him now, she saw the truth. He'd never been powerful. He'd been privileged, enabled, protected by systems that didn't ask too many questions as long as the money flowed. Marco stepped back, and the security team moved in immediately. "No, wait!" James struggled against their grip, his voice rising to something between anger and panic. "You're all making a mistake. I'm a partner at Whitaker Stevenson. I have connections. You had connections," Stevenson said coldly from the edge of the crowd. "As of this moment, you're terminated. Security will escort you from the building. Your belongings will be packed and sent to your address. Don't contact anyone at the firm." "Richard, you can't be serious!" "I'm deadly serious. You've destroyed this firm's reputation, you've betrayed our clients, and you've embarrassed me personally." Stevenson's jaw tightened. "I'll be recommending full prosecution. Get him out of my sight." The security team began walking James toward the exit, not gently, but not roughly either, just firmly, inexorably, like a tide pulling something out to sea. James tried to dig his heels in. "This isn't over. Do you hear me, DeLuca? This isn't—" "It is," Marco said. "You just haven't accepted it yet." The cameras came out in force then, not just phones anymore, but actual press cameras. Someone had tipped off the media, or maybe they'd been here all along. Flashes erupted like lightning, illuminating James' face as he was escorted through the crowd. Gone was the confident corporate star, the man who'd walked into this gala 3 hours ago, secure in his position and his power. In his place was someone smaller, diminished, exposed. Maya watched him go and felt nothing. No triumph, no vindication, just a quiet sense of something settling into place, like a book closing, like a wound finally scarring over. The crowd parted for James and his security escort like a curtain pulling back. People who'd laughed at his jokes an hour ago now turned away, avoiding eye contact, already rewriting their relationship to him in their minds. "We were never really close. I always suspected something was off. I'm shocked, truly shocked." At the ballroom entrance, James made one last attempt to break free. "You're all going to regret this," he shouted back at the crowd. "When the truth comes out, when people realize this was all fabricated—" But his voice was already fading, swallowed by distance and the murmur of 300 guests processing what they'd just witnessed. The doors closed behind him. Silence fell over the ballroom like snow. Then, slowly, conversation returned, whispers becoming voices, becoming the roar of social machinery processing new information, adjusting relationships, rewriting narratives. By morning, everyone here would have their own version of the story, their own angle, their own proof that they'd always known something was wrong with James Whitaker. Maya turned to Marco. He was watching the doors where James had disappeared, his expression unreadable. "Are you all right?" he asked, turning those dark eyes to her. She nodded. "Are you?" A small smile touched his lips. "I've had worse evenings." Around them, guests were starting to approach, carefully, respectfully, like people approaching a throne, offering apologies, offering support, offering to help in any way possible. The machinery of power recognizing a shift and adapting. Maya took a breath. The hardest part was over. Now came everything else. They left the gala an hour later. Not because Marco couldn't have stayed. He could have held court all night, accepting congratulations and carefully worded alliances from people who now understood exactly who Maya DeLuca was and what it meant to cross her husband. But Maya was tired. Bone-deep, soul-tired, the kind of exhaustion that came not from physical exertion, but from holding yourself together while your past and present collided in front of 300 witnesses. Marco saw it in her face, excused them gracefully, and guided her to the car with a hand at the small of her back. The penthouse was dark when they arrived, just the ambient glow of the city filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows. Manhattan stretched out below them like a circuit board, millions of lights marking millions of lives, most of them unaware that tonight, in a ballroom in Midtown, something had shifted. Maya kicked off her heels, leaving them by the door. The torn hem of her crimson gown whispered against the marble as she walked to the window, drawn to the view the way she always was when she needed to think. Behind her, she heard Marco's jacket thing removed, the soft clink of cufflinks on the entry table, the quiet sounds of him giving her space while staying close enough to catch her if she fell. Her phone buzzed in her clutch, then again, then 3 more times in rapid succession. She pulled it out, the screen lighting up with notifications.
News alert. Whitaker-Stevenson partner terminated amid fraud allegations. Breaking. SEC launches investigation into investment firm. Social media erupts after viral gala confrontation. Maya opened the first article. There was already a photo, grainy but clear enough. James being escorted out by security, his face a mask of panic and rage. The caption read, "Investment executive James Whitaker removed from Manhattan charity gala following public allegations of fraud and financial misconduct." She scrolled. Another article. Another photo. This one showed Marco, his hand on her back, his expression calm and unreadable as guests watched. Sources identify man as Marco DeLuca, East Coast business magnate, with wife Maya DeLuca, née Carter. Business magnate. That was one way to phrase it. Her phone buzzed again, a text from an unknown number. "Maya, it's Sarah from NYU. I just saw the news. Are you okay? If you need anything." Another. "Ms. Carter, Ms. DeLuca, this is Jennifer Wu from The Times. I'd love to discuss an interview about tonight's events." Another. "Maya, oh my God, I just saw the video. Are you serious? You're married to—" She silenced her phone and set it face down on the window ledge. "It's already everywhere," she said quietly. Marco appeared beside her, 2 glasses of water in hand. He offered her one. "The internet moves fast." "James is," she paused, searching for the right word, "destroyed. Professionally, socially, probably legally. By morning, he'll be unemployable, untouchable." "Yes." She turned to look at him. "Does that bother you?" "Should it?" I don't know." Maya took a sip of water, buying time to organize her thoughts. 3 years ago, I would have said yes. 3 years ago, I would have said that destroying someone's life, even someone who hurt me, wasn't justice, it was revenge. And now? I think, she paused, watching the lights of the city. Now I think maybe justice and consequences look the same from certain angles. He did those things, Marco. The fraud, the theft, the lies. You didn't make that up. No, Marco agreed. I just made sure people knew. Why? The question came out softer than she'd intended. Why go through all that trouble? You could have just told me to stay away from him, had security keep him away from me. You didn't need to expose everything. Marco was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried something she didn't often hear from him, vulnerability. Because men like James Whitaker don't stop, he said. They move from victim to victim, leaving damage in their wake. Your nonprofit work? How many women did you help who had stories like yours, who had men who controlled them, manipulated them, made them feel worthless? Maya thought of the intake forms she'd read, the stories she'd heard. Dozens. Hundreds. Too many. And how many of those men ever faced consequences? She knew the answer. They both did. Not enough. James would have done it again, Marco said. Maybe not to you, you were beyond his reach now, but to someone. His clients, his fiancée, the next woman who believed his promises. He turned to face her fully. I didn't do this for revenge, amore. I did it because someone had to stop him, and I had the power to do it. Maya felt something loosen in her chest. You did it for all of them. I did it for you, he corrected gently. That yes, for them too. Her phone buzzed again, multiple times, a cascade of notifications. She ignored it. Can I ask you something? She said. Always. How long have you known?
About the fraud, the affairs, all of it? Marco's expression didn't change. Since a week after you told me his name. Maya's eyes widened. That was 6 months ago, when we were talking about getting married, yes. He set his water glass down on the ledge beside hers. You mentioned him once, casually, my ex, James Whitaker. You didn't say what he'd done, not then, but something in how you said it. He trailed off, then continued. I had him researched, background check, financial records, everything. What I found, his jaw tightened. What I found made me want to do considerably more than expose him at a gala. But you waited. Power doesn't roar, Maya. It waits. The phrase settled between them like a truth they'd both always known. You waited 6 months. Why tonight? Because tonight, he touched you. Marco's voice dropped to something cold and final. He grabbed you, hurt you, made you feel even for a moment the way he used to make you feel. That was the line. Maya looked at him, really looked at him. This man who could destroy lives with a phone call, who commanded respect through reputation alone, who held power that most people only read about in newspapers. This man who had waited, who had gathered evidence, who had chosen the moment carefully, who had done it all, not for himself, but for her. I should feel guilty, she said, for what happened to him, for my part in it. Do you? She considered the question honestly, thought about James being escorted out, his face crumbling, his world ending in real time, thought about the clients he'd stolen from, the people he'd manipulated, the woman he cheated on. Thought about herself 3 years ago, crying in a parking garage, believing she deserved it. No, she said finally. Good, Marco nodded slowly. Outside, the city continued its endless motion. Lights turned on and off, cars moved through streets, lives continued, unaware and unconcerned about the small drama that had played out in a ballroom uptown. By morning, James's face would be on every news site. By afternoon, the think pieces would start, about power, privilege, the fall of a golden boy. By next week, there'd be a new scandal, a new fall from grace, and James would become just another cautionary tale. But tonight was still theirs. Marco wrapped his arms around Maya from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder, and together they watched the city burn with its usual million fires. It's over, she whispered. Yes, he agreed. It is. And for the first time in 3 years, Maya believed it. Not because James was destroyed, not because justice had been served or consequences had been faced, but because she was standing in a penthouse overlooking Manhattan, held by a man who had moved heaven and earth not to save her, she'd already saved herself, but to make sure the man who hurt her could never hurt anyone again. Power doesn't roar. It waits. And when it moved, it was absolute. Maya awoke to sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, the kind of golden morning light that turned Manhattan into something almost magical. For a moment, she lay still, disoriented by the softness of Egyptian cotton sheets and the warmth of the man beside her. Then the previous night came flooding back. The gala, the confrontation, James's face as security escorted him out, the cameras, the whispers, the way the entire ballroom had held its breath as her new world, her old world, collided in spectacular fashion. She turned her head. Marco was already awake, propped against the headboard with his tablet, reading what I assumed were the morning headlines. He'd put on reading glasses, which made him look almost scholarly, almost normal. Almost like he hadn't orchestrated a man's complete social and professional destruction 12 hours ago. You're staring, he said without looking up, a hint of amusement in his voice. I'm thinking. Dangerous activity this early. He set the tablet aside and removed his glasses. How are you feeling? Maya considered the question. How was she feeling? She'd expected to wake up anxious, guilty, maybe even regretful. Instead, she felt lighter, she said, surprising herself with the truth. Good. Marco's expression softened. She sat up, pulling the sheet around herself, and looked out at the city.
From 30 stories up, Manhattan stretched endlessly in all directions, the Hudson gleaming to the west, the Empire State Building rising to the south, Central Park spreading green to the north. The city where she'd been broken, the city where she'd rebuilt herself, the city that had witnessed both her destruction and her resurrection. "I keep thinking about who I was," Maya said quietly, 3 years ago, when James left me.
Marco didn't respond, just waited. He was good at that, at giving her space to find her own words. "I was so small," she continued. "Not physically, but inside. I made myself small for him, quieter, less opinionated. I changed the way I dressed, the way I spoke, the friends I saw. And I thought I was doing it for love, for us, for our future together." She drew her knees up, resting her chin on them. "But really, I was just making it easier for him to erase me. And when he finally did, when he handed me that check and told me to take care of myself, I believed him. I believed I was nothing without him." "You were never nothing," Marco said, his voice carrying quiet conviction. "I know that now, but then?" Maya shook her head. "Then I was drowning. I'd wake up every morning in that terrible studio apartment, and for a few seconds I'd forget. Then I'd remember, and it would hurt all over again. Not just that he'd left, but that I'd let him make me so small that his leaving almost destroyed me completely." She turned to look at Marco. "Did you do this for revenge?" The question hung between them, direct and unavoidable. Marco was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes searching her face. When he spoke, his voice was measured, careful. "Revenge is loud. It's emotional. It's about making yourself feel better by making someone else hurt. What happened last night," he paused, choosing his words, "that wasn't about my feelings. It was about facts. James Whittaker committed fraud. He stole from clients. He manipulated people who trusted him. Those things were true before I said them out loud." "But you didn't expose him because of his clients," Maya said gently. "You exposed him because of me." "Yes." No hesitation, no deflection. "I did it because of you, but not for revenge." He shifted closer, taking her hand in his. "I did it so you'd never feel small again." The words landed softly, but their weight was immense. "What do you mean?" Marco's thumb traced circles on her palm. "As long as James Whittaker walked through the world untouched, successful, confident, consequence-free, a part of you would always wonder if maybe he'd been right. Maybe you were the problem. Maybe you weren't good enough for his world." "I don't believe that anymore," Maya protested. "I know you don't, not consciously. But late at night, when you can't sleep, when you see men like him on the news, winning, succeeding, being celebrated, there's a whisper, isn't there? A small voice that sounds like him, telling you that you were lucky he even gave you a chance." Maya's breath caught, because he was right. She'd thought she'd silenced that voice, thought therapy and time and rebuilding her life had erased it completely, but it was still there. Quiet, insidious, waiting for moments of weakness to remind her of everything James had said she was. Worthless, forgettable, not enough. I wanted to kill that voice, simply, not metaphorically, not eventually, permanently. He cupped her face gently. "So I showed you, and more importantly, I showed the world exactly what James Whittaker really is. Not the successful partner, not the charming executive, but a fraud, a thief, a man who hurts people and hides behind a nice suit." "You wanted me to see him clearly," Maya said slowly, understanding dawning. "You wanted to see yourself clearly," Marco corrected. "You survived him. You rebuilt yourself. You became strong enough that when he tried to hurt you again, you didn't break. You didn't even bend." His voice dropped. "You stood there in that ballroom and watched him fall apart, and you were steady. That's who you really are, Maya, not the small, frightened woman he tried to convince you that you were." Maya felt tears prick her eyes, but they weren't sad tears. They were something else.
something cleaner. Release. This wasn't vengeance, she said, the realization settling into her bones. No, this was closure. Marco kissed her forehead. Yes. She leaned into him, letting the truth of it wash over her. Last night hadn't been about destroying James, though that had certainly happened. It had been about freeing her, about taking the power he'd stolen and returning it to its rightful owner. Not through violence, not through revenge, but through truth. What happens now? She asked. With James, I mean. The investigations, Now, the legal system does what it should have done years ago. The SEC will prosecute, his clients will sue, he'll face consequences that have nothing to do with me. I just accelerated the timeline. And us? He pulled back to look at her, his expression softening. Us? We have breakfast, we go about our day, we live our lives. A small smile. Though I suspect you'll be getting a lot of calls from people wanting to interview you, offer you opportunities, ask how you survived. Maya thought about that, about turning her story, the real story, not the sanitized version, into something that could help others, about using the platform she'd suddenly, unexpectedly been given. I think I'd like that, she said. Not the attention, but the chance to tell other women that you can survive men like James, that you can rebuild, that being broken doesn't mean you're being destroyed forever. You've been doing that work for years, Marco pointed out. In small ways, quietly. She looked out at the city again, at the morning light turning buildings into monuments. Maybe it's time to be a little louder. Marco smiled. A real smile, the kind he reserved for moments when he was genuinely proud. There's my wife. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the city wake up. Somewhere down there, James Whittaker was probably waking up too, to a world that had completely transformed overnight. No job, no reputation, no future that looked anything like the one he'd envisioned. Maya tried to feel sorry for him, found she couldn't. Not because she was cruel, but because some people needed to fall before they could understand the damage they had done. Some people needed to lose everything before they could begin to comprehend what they had taken from others. Maybe James would learn. Maybe he'll change. Maybe this would be the catalyst for him becoming a better person. But that wasn't her problem anymore. She'd spent 3 years rebuilding herself from the ruins he'd left. She'd clawed her way back to wholeness, fought through therapy and doubt and late-night terrors. She'd done the work. She'd healed. And last night, she'd closed the book on that chapter of her life. Not with a whisper, with a chandelier-lit ballroom full of witnesses and the quiet support of a man who understood that sometimes the greatest act of love wasn't saving someone. It was making sure they never felt small again. Marco, she said. Thank you. He kissed her temple. Always, amore mio, always. Outside, the city continued its endless dance. Inside, Maya Carter DeLuca sat in the sunlight and felt, for the first time in years, completely and utterly free. The victory wasn't loud. It didn't come with trumpets or celebration. It came quietly in a penthouse overlooking Manhattan as dawn broke over a new chapter. And that, Maya realized, is exactly how power should feel. Not like a roar, like peace. 3 months after the gala, Maya stood in front of a room of reporters, her hands steady on the podium, her voice clear. The Phoenix Initiative is named for what it represents, rising from the ashes of what tried to destroy you. Camera flashes erupted, pens scratched across notebooks. In the back of the room, Marco stood against the wall in a charcoal suit, his expression neutral, his presence quiet, supportive without being intrusive, there but not commanding the space. This was her moment. He'd made that clear from the beginning. This foundation, Maya continued, will provide 3 core services to women who've experienced economic abuse, manipulation, or control by powerful men. First, emergency financial assistance, enough to leave, to start over, to breathe. Second, legal support from attorneys who understand that financial abuse is real abuse. And third, professional development programs that help women rebuild careers that may have been derailed or destroyed by controlling partners. She paused, looking out at the sea of faces, some curious, some skeptical, some, mostly women in the back rows, leaning forward with an intensity that told her they understood exactly what she was talking about. "I know what it's like," Maya said quietly, and the room went completely silent. "To have someone make you feel like you're nothing without them, to have them control your finances, your decisions, your sense of self, to be discarded and told it was your fault for not being enough." A reporter in the front row, young, female, from the Times, had stopped taking notes and was just listening. "3 years ago," Maya continued, "I was that woman, broken, ashamed, convinced I deserved what happened to me. If you'd told me then that I'd be standing here today, launching a foundation, using my voice to help others, I wouldn't have believed you. I couldn't even imagine a future where I was whole again." She gripped the podium. "But I did heal. I did rebuild. And now I want to make sure other women know that survival is possible, that you can reclaim your power, that the narrative they wrote about you, that you're weak, that you're nothing, that you deserved their cruelty, is a lie." The applause started slowly, then built. Maya caught Marco's eye.
The foundation's office occupied the 10th floor of a building in Tribeca. Bright, open, designed to feel safe rather than institutional. Maya had insisted on that. No sterile corporate aesthetic, no intimidating marble lobbies, just warm wood, comfortable furniture, and windows that let in natural light. "We have 37 applications already," her assistant, Keisha, said, scrolling through the database, "and that's just from the soft launch last week." Maya reviewed the files, her heart aching with each story. A woman whose husband had hidden assets during their divorce, leaving her destitute while he lived in luxury. A girlfriend whose partner had sabotaged her job interviews to keep her dependent. A wife who'd discovered her name on fraudulent loans she'd never signed. Different details, same pattern. Control, manipulation, destruction. "Start with the emergency cases," Maya said. "Anyone in immediate danger or facing eviction, get them funds within 48 hours. "Already on it," Keisha confirmed. "Also, you have an interview request from NPR, 2 podcast invitations, and—" She paused. "Oprah's people called." Maya looked up. "Oprah?" "Apparently, your story resonated. They want to feature you in an episode about women reclaiming power after trauma." For a moment, Maya just sat there, processing. 6 months ago, she'd been invisible. Now, Oprah wanted to tell her story. "Tell them yes," she said finally. "But make it clear, this isn't about revenge or drama. It's about healing, about rebuilding." "Understood." That evening, Maya came home to find Marco in the kitchen, cooking. He'd insisted on learning after they got married, said he didn't want her to feel like she had to take care of him. Now he made pasta from scratch, the kind his grandmother used to make in Napoli. "How was the press conference?" he asked, not looking up from the dough he was kneading. "Terrifying, exhilarating." Maya dropped her bag and leaned against the counter. "We already have 37 applications." "That's good." "It's overwhelming." She watched his hands work the dough, strong, capable, surprisingly gentle. "Marco, what if I can't help them all? What if—" "You can't save everyone, but you can save someone, and that someone can save someone else. That's how change works, amore. One person at a time." She moved to stand beside him. "You could have started this foundation yourself. You have more resources, more connections, more—" "But it's not your story," Marco interrupted gently. "It's yours. These women need to see someone who survived, someone who understands, not someone who's always had power, someone who had to rebuild it from nothing." Maya felt her throat tighten. "You always know exactly what to say. I know you." He kissed her flour-dusted fingers. "And I know that watching you do this, watching you transform your pain into something that helps others, is watching you become exactly who you were always meant to be." The interviews came in waves. Maya sat across from journalists and podcast hosts, telling her story over and over. Not the sanitized version, not the everything happens for a reason version, the real version. Messy, painful, brutally honest. She talked about the shame, the self-doubt, the nights she couldn't eat because anxiety had made food impossible, the mornings she couldn't get out of bed because what was the point? But she also talked about the small victories, the first therapy session, the first day she didn't think about James, the first time she looked in the mirror and recognized herself again. A lot of people think healing is linear, she told one interviewer, that you wake up one day and you're fixed. But it's not like that. It's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. It's progress and setbacks, and learning to be patient with yourself. The interviewer, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes, leaned forward. What would you say to women who are where you were 3 years ago? Maya didn't hesitate. I'd say you're not crazy, you're not weak. What happened to you was real, and it wasn't your fault. And I'd tell them that survival is possible, that you can rebuild, that the person who hurt you doesn't get to write the ending of your story. You do. The clip went viral. Within a week, Maya's foundation had received over 1,000 applications. Donations poured in, not just from wealthy benefactors, but from regular people who'd been moved by her story. Women who wanted to help other women, men who'd witnessed abuse and wanted to do something about it. Maya hired more staff, opened satellite offices in Boston and Philadelphia, partnered with law firms willing to take cases pro bono. The Phoenix Initiative became more than a foundation. It became a movement. And Maya became its face, not because she sought attention, but because her story resonated, because she was proof that you could be destroyed and still rise, that powerful men didn't get the last word, that survival wasn't just possible, it was powerful. 6 months after the launch, Maya received a letter. It was handwritten on lined paper torn from a notebook. The return address was from a women's shelter in Queens. Dear Mrs. Delimta, I don't know you, but I was at the gala that night. I was serving champagne. I watched what happened with that man, your ex. I watched how you stood there, how your husband protected you, how the truth came out. I've been with a man like that for 4 years. He controls everything, my money, my phone, where I go. I thought I was trapped. I thought leaving was impossible. But watching you that night, I realized something. I'm not trapped. I'm just scared. And being scared doesn't mean I can't leave. I applied to your foundation. They helped me, gave me enough money for first month's rent and a security deposit, connected me with a lawyer, got me into a job training program. I left him 3 weeks ago. I'm writing to say thank you, not just for the help, but for showing me it was possible, for proving that women like us can survive men like them. You saved my life without even knowing my name. Thank you. Maya read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. When Marco came home, he found her on the balcony, the letter clutched in her hand, staring out at the city with an expression he couldn't quite read. What's wrong? He asked. She handed him the letter without a word. He read it slowly, his expression softening with each line. This is what you wanted, he said finally. I know, Maya's voice was thick. I just didn't expect it to feel like this. Like what? Like everything I went through, all the pain, all the humiliation, all those nights I wanted to disappear, like maybe it meant something, like maybe it had a purpose. Marco wrapped his arms around her from behind. It always meant something, amore mio. You just needed time to see it. They stood there together, watching the city lights flicker on as darkness fell. Below them, millions of lives unfolded, some breaking, some healing, some fighting battles no one else could see. And somewhere among them, a woman was packing her belongings, gathering her courage, and taking the first step towards freedom, because Maya had shown her it was possible, because one woman's survival had become another woman's roadmap, because the narrative had been rewritten, not by the men who tried to destroy them, but by the women who refused to stay broken. 1 year later, Maya stood in front of the mirror in their penthouse bedroom, fastening a strand of diamonds around her neck. The dress was different this time, midnight blue instead of crimson, elegant without trying to prove anything.
Her reflection looked back at her with clear eyes, steady hands, and something that had taken 3 years to reclaim: certainty. "You look beautiful," Marco said from the doorway, already dressed in his tuxedo, bow tie perfectly straight. Maya smiled. "I look ready." That too. Tonight was the annual Manhattan Philanthropic Coalition Gala, the same event circuit, the same glittering crowd, the same city where her world had imploded and then reformed into something stronger. But Maya Carter DeLuca was not the same woman who had attended last year's charity circuit. That woman was healing, still carrying wounds, still processing trauma, still discovering who she was in the aftermath. This woman was whole. The car ride to the venue was quiet, comfortable. Marco's hand rested on hers, his thumb tracing absent patterns on her wrist, a gesture of affection so routine now that neither of them thought about it. Outside the tinted windows, Manhattan rushed past in its eternal motion, indifferent to personal transformations. "Nervous?" Marco asked as they pulled up to the entrance. Maya considered the question honestly. A year ago, even 6 months ago, returning to this world, the world of galas and high society where she'd been humiliated, would have filled her with anxiety. But now? "No," she said, surprised by how true it was. "I'm not nervous at all." The flash of cameras started the moment they stepped out of the car. Not aggressive paparazzi flashes, but the kind reserved for people who mattered, for couples whose presence meant something. "Mrs. DeLuca, can you tell us about the Phoenix Initiative's expansion? Marco, is it true you're funding 3 new shelters? Maya, what does it feel like to be named one of Time's most influential people?" Marco guided her through the questions with practiced ease, his hand at the small of her back, protective without being possessive, present without overshadowing her. Inside, the ballroom was everything these events always were: crystal chandeliers, champagne towers, designer gowns, men in tuxedos discussing deals and donations. The same world that had watched her humiliation now watched her entrance with very different eyes: respect, admiration, in some cases, wariness. She was no longer the woman who could be dismissed. She was the woman who had survived, rebuilt, and transformed her survival into something that helped thousands of others. "Maya," a woman in an emerald gown approached. "Senator Richardson," Maya recognized. "I've been hoping to speak with you. Your foundation's work with economic abuse survivors, it's exactly what we need to incorporate into the new family law reform bill." They talked policy for 10 minutes. Then a tech executive wanted to discuss funding. Then 3 women, strangers, approached quietly just to say thank you, that her story had helped them leave, had helped them heal, had believed survival was possible. Maya spoke with each of them, never rushing, always present, because she remembered what it felt like to be invisible, to be nothing. She would never make another woman feel that way. Across the ballroom, she caught a glimpse of him. James. He was thinner than she remembered, older looking, though only a year had passed. His tuxedo was off the rack, not bespoke. He stood near the bar, not quite part of any conversation circle, nursing what looked like whiskey and trying very hard to appear comfortable. He was here as someone's guest, Maya realized, not as a power player, not as a partner at a prestigious firm, as someone's +1, permitted entry but not welcome, tolerated but not respected. She felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, no vindication, just a distant clinical observation. That's James Whittaker. He used to be important to me. Now he's just a man at a party. He saw her looking. For a moment, their eyes met across the crowded ballroom. She watched recognition flash across his face, followed by something else. Shame, perhaps, or regret, or just the dull ache of understanding that he was looking at everything he'd lost and everything he'd never be able to touch again. Maya held his gaze for 3 seconds, not challenging, not gloating, just seeing him, acknowledging his existence the way you might acknowledge a stranger on the street. Then she turned away, because he didn't matter anymore. Marco appeared at her elbow with 2 glasses of champagne. "You saw him?" "Yes." "And?" Maya accepted the glass, taking a small sip. "And nothing. He's just there, somewhere in the room, living his life, whatever that looks like now." She looked up at her husband. "I don't need to know more than that." Marco studied her face, and whatever he saw there made him smile. Small, proud, tender. You've come so far, amore mio. We've come so far, she corrected. The evening continued its elegant flow. Maya gave a brief speech about the Phoenix Initiative's first-year impact. Over 1,500 women helped, $3.2 million in emergency assistance distributed, 47 legal cases won. The applause was thunderous. She danced with Marco, a slow waltz that felt like floating. She networked with donors, charmed potential board members, and posed for photographs with women who'd been helped by her foundation, women who wanted the world to know they'd survived. Near midnight, as the event wound down, Maya found herself on the venue's terrace, looking out at the Manhattan skyline, the same view she'd seen 1,000 times, but tonight it looked different. Or maybe she was different. Maybe it was both. Marco joined her, sliding his jacket around her shoulders against the autumn chill. "Ready to go home?" he asked. Maya turned to back at him through the glass door.
At the ballroom, at the life she'd built in the ruins of the old one, at the power she'd reclaimed, not through destruction, but through transformation. Inside, somewhere in that crowd, James Whittaker was probably leaving, getting into whatever car service he could afford now, going back to whatever small apartment he'd ended up in, living with the consequences of his choices. She didn't need to watch him leave, didn't need confirmation of his diminishment to feel complete. She already felt complete. "You ready?" Marco asked again, softer this time. Maya turned to face him fully, and when she smiled, it came from somewhere deep and true, from the woman who'd been broken, from the woman who'd healed, from the woman who'd risen. "I've always been ready," she said. It was the truth. Not the truth of a year ago or even 6 months ago, but the truth of right now, standing on a terrace in Manhattan with a husband who'd never tried to make her small, having just spent an evening as the woman she'd always been meant to be. She hadn't needed revenge. Revenge was loud, temporary, satisfying in the moment but hollow afterward. What she'd needed was her power back. The power to define herself, the power to tell her own story, the power to walk into rooms without fear, to speak without shame, to exist without needing permission or approval from anyone. The power to look at the man who'd destroyed her and feel nothing but indifference. She'd needed that power back, and she'd taken it. Not by destroying James, though that had happened as a consequence of his own actions, not by seeking vengeance or proving something to the people who'd witnessed her humiliation, but by rebuilding herself, by healing, by transforming her pain into purpose and her survival into a roadmap for others, by becoming the woman she'd always had the potential to be, before someone had convinced her she was small. Marco took her hand, and together they walked back through the ballroom toward the exit. Heads turned as they passed. Conversations paused. People made space. Not because of Marco's reputation or power, though that certainly helped, but because of her. Because Maya Carter DeLuca had risen from ashes and become fire itself. Outside, the car was waiting. The city stretched around them, infinite with possibility. Maya settled into the leather seat, Marco's hand warm in hers, and felt the story, the old story, the one about being broken, finally close. A new story was already beginning, one where she wasn't the victim, wasn't the survivor, wasn't defined by what had been done to her. Just Maya, whole, free, powerful, exactly as she'd always been meant to be. The car pulled away from the venue, and in the side mirror, the ballroom lights grew smaller, dimmer, until they disappeared entirely into the Manhattan night. Behind her, the past. Ahead, everything else. She didn't look back.